Hey, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're actually going to look at how we can build onboarding screens or walkthrough screens in SwiftUI. So just looking at my screen here, you can see how I've got these three screens, and as I swipe through them, they've got their own unique content. And when I get to the last screen, I basically get this button that appears. So if I tap this button, it will dismiss it. But if I go back, you can see that the button disappears. But let's go back and tap the button. You can see that it dismisses the view, and then we can access our app. And if we run the app again, we're not going to see the onboarding/walkthrough screens. So let's see how to do this right now. So just before we get started, if we just actually look at what we've got here, so I've simply just got a tab view with three text views that have their own tab items and content. So we'll just run this in the preview. You can see here that each screen has its own unique content. But what we want to do first is for our onboarding screens is we actually want to basically build it based off some kind of model. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new folder here. I'm just going to call the folder onboarding. And then within this onboarding folder, we're going to create a struct called onboarding item. So let's do that now. Cool. So now that we've done this, let's just break down what the purpose of each one of these properties are. So we basically got a struct onboarding item, which is of type identifiable. Now the purpose of this will become a lot clearer later on in the tutorial. So we basically have an ID to uniquely identify each onboarding item. And then we have a title for the title that you see on the screen. The content is the text below it, and SF symbol is the image that you see on the screen. Now for this tutorial, I'm using FF symbols. If you wanted to extend this for like images that you might want to use, then you probably want to replace this with image and then basically switch between the two. But the next thing we need to do is basically create our view for our onboarding screen, so the actual view. So let's do that now. All right, cool. So what we want to do is we actually want to basically inject our model into this view. So I'm just going to create a constant called item, which is going to be of type onboarding item. And then we should get an error down here. So I'm just going to basically fix that by just creating a dummy onboarding item like so. Cool. So what we need to do is we essentially need to style this view to look like what we want it to look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type out some SwiftUI code and then we'll break it down. So let me do this now. All right, cool. So now we've added in our view. So before I break this down, what I'm just going to do is I'm going to add in some dummy content so you can basically see what we're actually doing. So in the item initializer, what I want you to do is basically, rather than type in .init just to create an empty initializer, we're just going to say onboarding item. And then we're going to choose the parameters here, but we're not going to add we don't need to add an ID in. So we're just going to add in a title, content, and an FF symbol. So whatever you put in here, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to put in some random stuff in here. So if you want to replace this with whatever, then you can. So all right, cool. So make sure that you choose a legit FF symbol, or obviously this ain't gonna work. So you can see now that we've got our view here, and it's looking like what we want it to look like. So let's just break down how we basically styled this view. So we basically got a V stack, which is going to basically vertically, hold all our items. And then within that, we basically got a spacer at the top, which essentially will push everything down. So it starts from the bottom. And then what we have is an image. So we have an image, which you can see here. We have some text that we style, and we basically set the content alignment to be in the center. And we also again have another piece of text here, which we style again, and we set the content alignment to be in the center as well. Now you may be wondering what this means if you never saw this before. All this basically means is if this title is nil, then I want you to use an empty string. That's all that means. Now the content, in my opinion, is a bit too far down from the bottom because of this spacer. So what we're going to do is on the V stack, we're just going to apply a bit of padding to the bottom. So let's do that now. Cool. And as you can see, it's now pushed up a bit more, which it looks better now. So this is looking good. Okay, so what we want to do now is we basically want to create our screen view that's going to hold all of our onboarding views. So let's create that now. So if you just go back into your onboarding folder, if you create a new SwiftUI file called onboarding screen view. Okay, cool. And now, in order for us to basically get that effect where you can basically swipe between the different screens, what we're going to use is we're actually going to use a tab view. So we're going to use a tab view, but we're going to have to set a special modifier on it to basically get that swiping effect. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in the tab view, and then we'll break that down, and then we'll move to the next step. So let's do that now. All right, cool. So all I did is I just basically copied the onboarding item and the onboarding view from our previous view just to save time. Now, if you want to uniquely change this content, go for it. It's all, it's all yours. It is your project, right? So what I've done is I basically added this tag in onto our view. So what this essentially means is it basically makes our view unique within this tab view. So we're basically saying this is the first view in the tab view, second and third, because programming starts from 0. So now what we need to do is we actually need to basically apply the style to basically swipe between each view. So in order to do that, tab views have a modifier. We can basically set the tab view style. And the one that we want to use is page view tab style. So let's apply this onto this now. All right, cool. So as you can see now, when we added our modifier on our tab view style, we got rid of the tab bar and we now have the content filling the screen. And if I just quickly just run this, you should see that you're able to actually swipe between all the views. All right, cool. Sweet. So what we want to do now is we basically want to add in a background to our indicators. So the problem is that we have now is that we can't actually see our indicators because our screen is white. So to get around that, you can basically give your indicators a background. So let's do that. All right, cool. And as you can see now, because we've added this index view style modifier onto our using this modifier and we passed in our index style, we now get to see our indicators with a background. So if we just run this, you can now see that we can see what page or screen, I should say, in the onboarding that we're currently on. But as you can see, there's a problem here. So this piece of code that we have here is it could do, but it's not the best, because if we want to add a new view into this tab view, we have to start copying and pasting, and this can become massive. So to avoid doing this, what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at how we can use a plist to basically handle our content for our onboarding. So in our onboarding folder, let's create a plist file. So new file, property list, next. And then we're just going to call this property list onboarding content plist. All right, cool. Now, you may be wondering what a plist is if you've never come across it. Essentially, all it is a file that basically allows you to define like key value pairs. So you can basically have a key and then it has its value. So when would you want to use something like this? So you want to use something like this when you have static content that you basically want to organize. So let's say, for example, in our case, we basically have all our onboarding view, which is not going to be dynamic, it's going to be static. And we want to organize all our content within this one file. So let's do that now. So the first thing that we want to do is we basically want to change the type of this to an array, because we want an array of onboarding items. So let's do that. So you select here and then change it to array. And then you'll see this little plus button here. So if you just click the plus button, you'll then get an item. So this item here is your key, and then this is your value. But for us, because we want an array of onboarding items, so we can basically define it here, we need to change this from string to dictionary. So let's do that now. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to basically add our properties in here to match our onboarding item. So let's do that now. So we want to add in title. So just so you don't make any, just so I don't make any spelling mistakes, and to speed this up, I'm just going to copy and then go back, hit the plus button on the item 0, and then this is fine, it being a string. So hit the plus button. So within the item 0, you should see that this is within item 0. You'll see string, new item, and then change this new item to title. And then we're just going to leave it empty for now. Let's add another one. And then copy content. And then again, hit the plus. FS symbol. All right, cool, sweet. So as you can see here, we basically now got an array which has a dictionary, which is going to be our onboarding item object. And if I just basically open them up side by side so you can see them, you can see now that our onboarding item basically matches the structure of this dictionary, so we can actually map this to our onboarding item. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to basically create another one. So if I just do Command C, and I'm just going to copy and paste it to create 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill this out with some dummy content. So I'll do that now. All right, cool. So now we just look at this. This is basically going to be our array of onboarding items. So what we need to do now is basically need to get the content out of this plist and basically convert it into an array of onboarding item. So in order to do that, what we're going to do now is we're basically going to just close this, and we're going to actually create a new file in here. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm actually going to create a new class called Plist Manager. So let's do that now. And I'm essentially going to define the interface of this. So let's do that. All right, cool. So now I basically defined how this is going to basically, work. And the reason why I'm defining this in a protocol first is so we can actually unit test this in a later video. So the whole purpose of this function is to literally just convert our plist. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to basically create a struct to basically take this protocol. And the reason why I'm using a struct and not a class is because I don't need to keep a reference of this. This function is literally just going to just give me an array of converted plist objects. All right, cool. So now we've actually done this. We've got our struct and it's using our protocol. We got our function. What we actually need to do now is we need to basically make our model a codable object so we can actually convert it from a plist into our model. So we just go to onboarding item, and then on here, what we want to do is we want to type in codable. Cool. And then what we need to do now is we need to actually manually basically set our variables based on our coding keys. So I'm just going to type this out and then I'll break it down for you. All right, cool. So let's just break down what we've done here. So essentially what we have here is we basically have our onboarding item struct. Before it was just identifiable, now it's codable and identifiable. And again, I'll explain this in a bit. So we basically have created our coding keys for our codable objects. So you can see here how they match the exact same. And then we have to create an initializer here so that we can basically initialize this with dummy content if we want to for our previews. But what we've done here is we're using the decoder initializer to basically try to decode this object and map up the values. So it's going to basically get the coding keys, and then it's going to basically try to map each coding key and assign the value inside of itself. So it's going to basically, in the container objects, go try and basically look for the key title and set that, content set that, SF symbol set that. And notice how the data type optional string is the same with all of them, so it's all matching. All right, cool. So now we've done this, we need to actually use this codable object in our plist manager struct. to basically create an array of objects from our plist. So let's do that now. All right, cool. So let's break this down. So essentially what we're doing here is we're using a guard statement. So the reason why we're using a guard statement is because if any of the things I'm about to discuss fail, then we just want to return a empty array. And this stops me from having to use an if statement all the time, like if. We can just basically just chain it all and then just return if it fails. So the first thing we're doing here is we're basically getting the file name that's been passed into this function to basically look for the plist within the projects bundle. So that is, if we just go to the project and then you just go to build phases, so that will be here where it's copy bundled resources. So you can see our plist lives here. And then what we're basically saying is we want to basically convert that object that's found at the URL, and then we basically want to get that object and turn it into a data object so that we can use this property list decoder object to basically decode it into an array of onboarding items. So this is where the codable comes into play, because it's trying to decode our data, which is our property list, our plist, and turn it into an array of onboarding items. And if all this passes, then it will carry on. If it fails, it will just return an empty array of objects, so you won't get anything. And if it passes, then it will return the plist now as an array of onboarding item. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually basically create our onboarding object that will basically give us the items, and also as well we want it to basically give us a limit in terms of like when the end has been reached. So in our onboarding folder again, let's just create a new file and we'll just call it onboarding content manager. And then we'll just go define the implementation. All right, cool. So we've now got our onboarding content manager, and it has, quite a few different implementations compared to our other plist manager protocol. So this time we have a variable int called limit, and it's a getter. So essentially the reason why it's a getter is because we don't want to allow someone to basically change this value from outside of its scope. And we just want to basically just allow you to just get the value, and that's it. Similarly, again, we've got our onboarding items, which is the exact same thing. We only want someone to be able to get the value. We don't want to be able to change it. But this time we have our initializer in our protocol. Now you might be wondering why. So the reason why is because I want to basically, again, in our future video, I want to basically be able to unit test this. And I basically want every single class that inherits the wrong word, every single class that basically takes on this protocol to be able to basically use any object that is of type plist manager. So this is just more for making it, reusable, and also promoting dependency injection as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to basically use this protocol on our class. Now the reason why I'm using a class this time and not a struct is because you may want to keep a reference of this manager in memory, and we don't want to have unique copies of it every single time. So we have just one reference in memory. I'm going to use a class. So let me just write this out, and then all right, cool. So let's just break down what we've done here. So we've basically got our class here, onboarding content manager impl for implementation. But if you never saw this keyword before, final basically means that no other class can subclass this class. So let's say, for example, if I had a class here called X, I can't do this. It'll actually complain. So it can't, because it's a final. So you're basically saying that nothing can inherit this class. So it basically essentially locks it off in it. So what we've basically got here is we've got our limit getter computer property. So what this does, it basically gets the items, so the number of items in the array, and it subtracts it by 1, and because obviously programming starts from 0, so we want to basically get the index of the last item. We have our property here, which are an array of items, which is just going to hold our items in it. And when you initialize this class, we basically are going to set our items array with the plist manager and convert it. So we're using the onboarding content plist that we defined here. So this plist here needs to match the name of the plist here, so it's the same. So now what we've got is we basically got like a lightweight class to basically convert a plist into an array of onboarding items. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to basically try and see this in action. So if you just go back to your content view, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to see this print some stuff out. So if we just basically go onto the tab view and then we just add an on appear. So within the on appear, we're going to basically create an instance of our class instruct and then just print to the console. So I'm just going to type this out now. Cool. So you can see here how I've initialize the plist manager, and I'm passing this into the content manager's implementation, passing that in, and then just go print the items. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this on the simulator. Cool. And as you can see here, it's actually successfully decoded it. All right, sweet. So what we actually want to do now is you actually want to use this onboarding content manager within our onboarding screen view. So what we're going to do is I'm just simply going to just stop running this. And then I'm just going to basically take out this on appear. So it should be looking like this, where you just have a tab view. And if you just go into your onboarding screen view, so just go into this here, onboarding screen view. What we want to do is we actually want to inject our manager into this view. So our onboarding content manager. So let's do that now. It's really important that when you're doing this, you don't use the implementation, you use the onboarding content manager, just so we can use like dependency injection. So we should get an error. So what we need to do is we just need to inject a onboarding content manager into here. So if you just hit fix, and then in here, we just basically use the implementation. And then in the manager, we'll just say plist manager implementation. Okay, cool. So make sure that it's the implementations that you're injecting in. And then the next thing you want to do is you now want to use our identifiable to basically dynamically create this screen here. So what we've basically done here is we're basically using our, because remember when I was talking about identifiable, so this is where we're actually going to see it in action. So we're actually going to use the identifiable on our onboarding item. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically uniquely loop through our array of onboarding items, which is possible because they're identifiable, but we're going to actually loop through and get the indices. So this index here is actually the index of where it is in the array. And then what we're going to do is for our manager, we're going to basically get the items array of our onboarding items and then pass in the item at the index into our onboarding view. All right, cool. So the next thing that we need to do now is we need to basically add our button so we can basically show and hide it depending on what screen you're on. So in order to do that, we're going to basically use a state variable to basically track where what screen you're currently on. So in the onboarding screen view, let's just create a new state property. And then what we're going to do is we're going to attach that state property onto our tab view so we can uniquely identify the current view that you're on. So if you just do the initializer on here. All right, cool. So now we're basically binding our selected index to our tab view. All right. And then what we need to do now is we need to actually inject this state and the limit into our onboarding view. So we actually need to bind the two together. So if you just go into your onboarding view, so what we need to do is create two new variables. All right, cool. So now we have our two properties. So essentially what we have now is we basically have our limit and our index, which is a binding variable. So we basically have our initializer, which is what we use to basically set the values in here, obviously. Now we have to do this so we can basically set our binding manually. And you'll notice that when you're setting binding variable via an initializer, you have to use the underscore. So the underscore is basically essentially, from what I can remember, is basically getting the value of this binding variable, so the setter, and it's basically setting it. So we set the index. So if you scroll down here, we should have some errors. So let's add in the missing properties. All right, cool. And you can see that we're using a constant here. All right, sweet. So what we need to do now is we actually need to basically pass in our properties from our onboarding screen into this view. So if you just go back to your onboarding screen view, we should get some errors. Right, cool. So now let's add in the remaining argument. So let's add in the limit. And then let's add in the index, which is going to be our selected. Cool. And if we just build this, it's looking all good. All right, sweet. So now we're binding the current selected tab, and we're passing our limit. So in our onboarding view, what we need to do now is we need to basically add a button in and basically either show or hide it if it's reached the limit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type this out and then break it down as usual. All right, cool. So now we basically got our button in place now, as you can see. So we basically just added a button. I've added a few styles onto it, as you can see, with the clip shape and the capsule padding and all that. But the interesting thing here is the stuff at the bottom. So we're basically setting the opacity to either 1 or 0, depending on if you've reached the limit. So if you reach the end, then we're going to show the button. And if you haven't, then we're not going to show it. And we're basically also going to disable interaction if you've not reached the end. And we've also added some animation onto it, so it basically nicely fades into the view and fades out. All right, cool. All right, cool. So what we actually want to do now is we actually want to basically handle the action for when the button's tapped. So essentially what I want to happen is when you tap this button, I want the view to basically dismiss from the bottom. So now we could use environments, we could use environment objects, but for the sake of this tutorial, I want to show a different way of doing this. So I'm going to use a closure. So at the top here, if you just scroll up to onboarding view, I'm just going to create a type alias at the top here. All right, cool. So this is essentially just our type alias for our closure. That's going to return nothing. Just avoid closure. And then what we need to do now is we need to actually add this closure to this view here. So what I'm going to do is here, underneath limit, I'm just going to say handler, and it's going to be of type this. And then at the very end of index, we're just going to basically add a new property. So I'm just going to say handler. And it's going to be at escaping. And it's going to be of type onboarding get started action. And then we're going to set our handler. Oh, spelled handler wrong. All right, cool. So you can see here, and then we should get an error down here saying that we're missing the handler. So to fix that, just create two curly braces like so. All right, sweet. So what we need to do now is we need to basically use our handler outside of this scope here. So where it says action in our button, we're going to use our handler like so. Okay, sweet. So now what we need to do is we need to actually pass our closure through to our onboarding screen as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our onboarding screen view, and then we're going to again create the handler using the same type alias as before. And as you can see, this view doesn't actually have an initializer. So what we're going to need to do is we're basically going to need to create one. So a quick way to do this is just to hold down command on your keyboard, click on the struct, and then generate member-wise initializer. All right, cool. like so. And I'm just going to paste this below here. And then we need to mark our handler again as at escaping. Cool. Let's go delete the internal because we don't need that. All right, sweet. And then to fix these two errors, the first we need to do here for the preview is just literally just add in the curly braces like so. But now this is the interesting bit. So rather than me doing the curly braces here like this and then calling handler like this, what I can actually do is then I can actually directly pass in the handler to this view, so it basically triggers it through the chain. So what we're going to do is after selected, comma, handler, and then we're just going to basically pass in our handler. And the reason why we can do that is because our closure, if you look at our closure in onboarding view and in screen view, they're actually both the exact same in terms of the signature. So when our handler executes in our onboarding view, we're basically going to execute the handler within this screen view as well. All right, cool. So the final step that we need to, well, not the final step, but the final step with our onboarding screen view is we need to handle the presentation of dismissing our view. And in order to do that, we're going to use the environment's presentation mode. So in our onboarding view, we're going to create a property in here to access the environment. All right, cool. So now we have our private variable that basically accesses the environment's presentation mode. So this is what allows us to basically dismiss a view manually ourselves in SwiftUI. And within our button, in our action handler, we just want to call the following. So just say presentation mode dot wrapped value dot dismiss, and this will actually dismiss any view that's currently on the screen. All right, cool. So we've now handled our presentation mode. So the next thing we need to do is we actually just need to basically present this screen whenever it's the user's first time running the app. And in order to do that, we can use something called the app storage. So that's basically just use a default spot in SwiftUI. So what we need to do is we need to go all the way back to our content view. Okay, cool. And at the top here, I'm going to basically define a property for our app storage so we can basically manage whether we should show on or hide, well, just not show the screen. So let's just type this out now. Cool. So what we've basically done now is we basically got our app storage property called has seen onboarding, and by default we set it to false because if you're running it for the first time, you've not saw it. So in order to present our onboarding screen on top of our app, then what we need to do is we need to use a modifier on our tab view called full screen cover. All right, cool. So what we're basically saying here is on our tab view, we basically want to use the full screen cover modifier. And what this is going to do is it's going to basically present a view but cover the entire screen. And then what we want to do is we're basically only going to show the content that we've got to add in here in a minute if has seen onboarding is false. So if this is false, then we're basically going to show the content. Now, the reason why I'm using the constant is because we can't actually bind and check for false at the same time. So that's why I'm setting a constant of false for this. And now what we need to do is in our onboarding content, we need to actually use our onboarding screen view. So let's do that now. All right, cool. So in our content, you can see here we basically create an instance of our Plist Manager. We've also created our content manager, and we're actually passing that into our onboarding screen view. And within our action handler, so when someone taps the get started button, we're going to change our has seen onboarding in our app storage to true because you saw it. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to test this. So I'm just going to run this on my simulator. All right, cool. So as you can see, when it runs for the first time, you get to see the onboarding screens and it appears, and we can swipe through and see our custom content that we define in our P list. And if I scroll onto the last page, the button appears. If I scroll off it, it disappears. And if we tap the button on the final page, our view gets dismissed and we can now see our app. So if we just rerun the app again, we shouldn't see our onboarding screen view. So we don't see the onboarding screen view. And if I delete the app off the device, you should see it appear again because it's a fresh new install. So as you can see here. All right, sweet. So what I want to do is I just want to show you one more thing. So let's say, for example, in the future, if someone comes to you or you yourself need to add more screens into this, it's really easy. So all you need to do is just simply go into your plist and then just basically add a new item. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And then if we just change the content here, all right, cool. And if I just run this again now, you can see now page and integrator at the bottom has updated to now 4 items, and this isn't the last item anymore, so we don't get the button. And when we get to the last item, you can now see that we basically get the button. So you can easily customize and change the way that your onboarding works now by basically simply just changing the plist, so you can like reorder them or do whatever you need to do. So all your content is managed in the plist. All right, cool. So in this video, we covered quite a few things. So we covered app storage, we covered bindings, we covered plists, we even covered some of the environment as well. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you give it a thumbs up. Also as well, if you have any suggestions or any future videos you'd like me to tackle, leave a comment in the comment sections below. I'd love to see what you have built with this if you followed along with the tutorial. So I guess tweet me on my Twitter so you can show me as well. And as usual as well, to help the channel grow, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell as well to get updates as to when I release new videos. Now that's everything from me. I'll catch you all in a bit. Deuces.